Welcome back to video number 3 in this 5-part series on how to start a child and family assessment. And in this video, I'm going to be talking all about managing priorities in 3 different ways: looking at local authority timescales in terms of our priorities and how that connects, thinking about the impact of drift and delay, and also considering family perspectives when we look at priorities. If you're new here, I'm Vicky Shevlin. I founded Social Work Sorted, which is an online platform of resources for newly qualified social workers. I'm a registered social worker. I've previously been a child protection conference chair, and I currently create training for newly qualified social workers and students to support them in practice. So let's get started looking at local authority timescales. I'm talking about local authorities in the UK when you are working in children's services. When we're thinking about child and family assessments, we have timescales that are in place from a legislative perspective. If I had time, I'd re-record that, but I'm probably not going to. The maximum time frame for the assessment to conclude, which means the conclusion is when you are reaching a decision on the next steps, should be no longer than 45 working days from the point of referral. That is from our statutory guidance, Working Together to Safeguard Children. Talked about our statutory guidance in video number 1, so you can go back and watch that if you haven't. What's really important to remind people is that those 45 working days are not from the point of you getting an email saying, we're allocating you this family to work with. It's from the point of referral. So when you are getting organised, some other videos on getting organised you can go and watch as well. It's really important to find the date when the referral came in and count 45 days from that. Sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but I've made the mistake lots of times, and it meant that I was late putting an assessment in or got really mixed up in terms of the dates. It's working days, so not weekends when you're thinking about that. And 45 days is the maximum. So what you will find, depending on where you work or where you are on a placement, that sometimes in an initial assessment team, the expectation will be that you are undertaking an assessment in far less time than 45 working days. Sometimes it can be 10 to 15 days, again, depending on where you're located. So be mindful of that as well. Just take a minute to reflect on how it feels when someone places a time pressure on you that you can't control. That's really difficult for you as a social worker because you feel like that clock is ticking down. But when we are open and honest with families and we tell them about the timescales that we are under, they want to know when an assessment is going to be finished and when they're going to be able to read it and consider it. If we're telling them a particular number of days, we need to remember that that 45 days or 20 days, whatever it is, becomes a countdown for that family as well and adds additional pressure for them. Timescales are written into legislation, said it right that time, because of the impact of drift and delay. So there is a wider conversation about things like McDonaldization of social work, which I would recommend that you go and read about, in terms of putting people through certain processes that reflect some of the fast food chain systems. But I would invite you to come back to this idea of timescales being there to stop drift and delay for children and families. Drift being where a family or a child may be open to social workers, but nothing is really happening or moving, nothing is changing. And delay meaning that there is a gap between their child getting what they need to get or getting an intervention that we have recommended. So they're there for a reason, those timescales. We can't ignore them. We need to focus on the delay that it could cause for intervention for children and also the increased stress for children and families. So as I talked about, if you are open as you should be with a child and a family and you say that, around this time or this week, you will have a copy of the assessment. If they then don't have it, that's going to cause increased stress for them and it's going to start to break down your relationship. Have to take into account the systems. That's why we've got our circles there to remind us that it is never just on one individual social worker when it comes to timescales, and there are so many external pressures. But this is just a reflection on that process of child and family assessment. Finally, when you're thinking about priorities for or within a child and family assessment, it's so important to think about family perspectives. Stick with me on my Uber analogy, which you may have heard before, but one of the reasons why Uber is so successful as a business is because, unlike ringing a taxi and waiting, you can order an Uber and you watch it on its way. And what psychologists have found or analysed is that the process of being able to see the journey of your Uber reduces anxiety about when it's going to arrive. We could have two social workers who go out to a family and explain that the child and family assessment is going to be completed within 40 days. Family number one might be in a taxi model. They have nothing in between the start and those 40 days in terms of an update or things that are happening, and it's going to increase their anxiety. But we might have family number two. They might have ordered an Uber effectively. They can see the steps in that journey, and it alleviates the anxiety of what is going to happen and when it's going to happen, which massively links with everything I was talking about in video number 2, thinking about preparation. Families understanding the end point of the journey or what might happen next. Remembering when we're balancing our priorities as a social worker, which might be a huge caseload, numerous things happening at once, managing crises, managing our own well-being, that life does continue to happen for children and families as well. So what might feel like a priority for us may not feel like a priority for that child and family, depending on what they're going on. And that's okay, because life happens for everybody. Understanding flexibility within that assessment process. When we open an assessment, that can cause increased stress for a child and a family, and anything can happen within that time as well. So it might be that you would begin to intervene under Section 17 of the Children Act, that you're doing a child and family assessment, and there may be a crisis where there is risk of significant harm, and you might then be having a strategy meeting to talk about Section 47. So understanding that whilst we have these processes around us, we are working with humans and human relationships, and so flexibility has to matter. And then when we're thinking about prioritising and priorities, being child-centred, always coming back to that idea of what is happening for the child and how can we make that child, the young person, their experience a priority. Watching. This has been video number 3. There are 2 more videos in this series on multi-agency working and social work skills for assessment. Assessment is something that I am hugely passionate about. I was as a social worker and also as a child protection conference chair when I had oversight on numerous assessments and was able to work with social workers and families and really look at where some of those gaps were. It's why I created my accredited training, Assessment Skills for Newly Qualified Social Workers. And if you're interested in learning more about that or any of the training that I offer, you can get in touch with me, vicky@socialworksorted.com. There are links in the notes of this video to follow me on Instagram, listen to the podcast, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd encourage you to do all of those things. Please remember to like and share this video if it was helpful, and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Thank you for watching.